The story behind the headlines. Every Sunday evening at the same time, the National Broadcasting Company, in cooperation with the American Historical Association, presents Caesar Searchinger in his analysis of the news. In this analysis, Mr. Searchinger draws upon research material especially prepared for these broadcasts by eminent historians. Caesar Searchinger.
Good evening, everybody. President Truman's trial balloon about opening this country to a sizable number of Jewish refugees has not met with the applause it deserves, especially from members of Congress who hold the key. If it were favorably received, say dispatches from London, the British may admit at least a token quota in addition to the 200,000 still said to be in the United Kingdom from the war. This might be a new approach to the Jewish refugee problem, but it will hardly ease the Palestine crisis at this stage, the crisis which has held the front pages all week. Earlier in the week, the President sent a communication to the British government, but its contents are still unrevealed. This communication was the first official act of the President in this matter since he recalled our members of the British-American Cabinet Committee for consultation. The consultation has been hush-hush, too. The Cabinet Committee's job, as you know, was to try and implement the report of an earlier Anglo-American committee which recommended the early admission of 100,000 displaced persons into Palestine. Instead, the committee has come up with a plan of its own. The plan was to federalize Palestine, dividing it into Jewish, Arab, and British zones under a central British government. The Jewish zone was to consist of the central coastal area and the plain of Esdraelon in the north, altogether about 1,500 square miles. This plan was promptly denounced by the Jewish Agency, and our own government was quick to wash its hands of the plan. The Jewish Agency, however, produced an alternative plan, and this, it was reported, was sent to London by the President in his mysterious letter. This alleged Zionist plan goes much further than the committee plan. Instead of a federation, there would be autonomous Jewish and Arab states. The Jewish state would include, besides the coastal strip, all of Galilee, the whole of the Jordan Valley, and Negev, the defensive region which the British had reserved for themselves. If this plan has been sent to London, it is almost certain of rejection in its present form, for it means the reduction of British authority at a moment when the British are frantically defending their hold on the Middle East against what they consider is a serious threat. It would also mean flying in the face of the Arab nations, whose goodwill is felt to be more necessary than ever. The British reaction is probably known in Washington by now, but the White House is strictly non-committal. All that is admitted is the President has sent to the British certain suggestions which might be thought helpful. So it looks as though we are once again letting George do it, or rather John Bull. How is he doing? Well, there are talks going on in Paris between Mr. Bevin and the Jewish Agency leaders, and there are suggestions of a compromise which may satisfy the moderate Zionists at least. All this is preparatory to a proposed roundtable conference for which some of the Arab states have already accepted invitations. In the meantime, violence in Palestine itself has reached a new peak since the King David Hotel was bombed by extremists 4 weeks ago. The King David Hotel housed the headquarters of the British Army and the Secretariat of the Palestine government. While responsible Jewish and Zionist bodies denounced this deed as a dastardly crime, the British military rounded up resistance leaders and suspects in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. 20,000 troops moved into Tel Aviv, imposed a curfew, and conducted a house-to-house search. There were over 700 arrests. Next, the port of Haifa was isolated and reinforced. Some ships crowded with illegal immigrants were being held in the harbor, and it was announced that they would be shipped to the island of Cyprus to be detained pending further developments. When this became known, a crowd surged toward the harbor, was fired on, and 3 people were killed. It was the British attempt to stop the wave of illegal immigrants, plus the delay in admitting the 100,000 displaced persons from Germany, that gave a new impetus to extremist agitation and encouraged the recent violence. This immigration wave has been increasing ever since last November, and has recently risen to a flood. These immigrants do not come from German DP camps. They have nothing to do with the 100,000 whose plight has been the chief argument for opening the gates of Palestine. These illegal immigrants come mainly from the Eastern European countries, chiefly Poland, where a savage anti-Semitism marked by pogroms has made conditions unbearable for Jews. Thousands of harassed people are traveling westward in a steady stream, many of them into the American zone of Germany, which means that they must pass either through the Russian zone or Czechoslovakia. Thousands more are smuggled southward from country to country by means of forged passports and visas with the help of a widely ramified organization known as the Underground Railroad. Thus they find their way to southern European seaports, where ships, sometimes called coffin ships because of the crowding and horrible conditions on board, await them. These ships either evade the port authorities or get clearance in mysterious clandestine ways. Until recently, these unscheduled immigrants have been allowed to land in Palestine by means of a legalistic device. The British authorities simply deducted the number of those who landed illegally from the total balance of the quota established under the White Paper regulations of 1939. Now, in an effort to stop the rising flood, the British have closed Haifa, the principal immigrant port. Naval ships have been sent to patrol Palestine waters in order to head off further unscheduled immigrant ships and send them to Cyprus. Palestine, therefore, is under a virtual blockade. The British government has explained all this in a new white paper, which calls on a number of European and American governments to cooperate by stopping the issuing of visas for Palestine. All this, of course, has further inflamed Zionist feeling, and more violence in Palestine is the result. 3 days ago, the extremist organization Irgun Tzvai Leumi called for a general Jewish revolt in Palestine. Henceforth, it says, the Jews will wage not a war of retribution, but a constant war. It seems clear that the Palestine question and the whole Jewish refugee problem have reached the ultimate boiling point. Something has to be done. Both the British and American governments are concerned, directly and indirectly. For one thing, we are as loath to receive Jewish refugees in our occupation zone of Germany as the British are to lift all restrictions in Palestine. Nor are we willing to raise our immigration quota for Eastern European countries here at home. Historically, the United States is concerned in this matter ever since the League of Nations awarded the Palestine Mandate to Great Britain in 1923. We could have had the mandate, but we declined. Had we become a member of the League, which we promoted, we would have been one of the official sponsors of the mandate. But, although we didn't, we took official cognizance of it, and Congress officially endorsed the idea of the Balfour Declaration, which is embodied in the mandate. We therefore took a definite interest in establishing a Jewish home in Palestine, a country in which the Jewish population was at that time only 10%. We are the country with the greatest number of Jewish citizens in the world. This country, in one way or another, produced most of the capital and financial support for the Zionist cause, and we have a considerable stake in its success. But we are also materially interested in the future of the Middle East. Today, far more than in 1923, our commercial and strategic interests in the Middle East are tied up with those of Great Britain. First, there is a perennial thirst for oil. Our oil fields in the Arabian concessions have been enlarged during the war. Our interest in the Arabian countries has grown in consequence. President Roosevelt's elaborately staged meeting with King Ibn Saud and the King of Egypt was not arranged for its picturesque effect alone. Today, more than ever, the Middle East is a great trading region in which we shall have equal chances with the British. That is one result of the new commercial and loan agreement approved by Congress. But militarily, up to now, the British have held the bag. During the war, their positions were gravely threatened, and they barely held Egypt and the Suez Canal with the help of Lend-Lease material. Today, the British and American interests in the Middle East are threatened by the rise of a new power, Soviet Russia. The Soviet-Iranian dispute last year had a direct bearing on the British and American interests near the Persian Gulf. The Soviet troops finally withdrew under Anglo-American pressure exerted very largely by Secretary Burns in the Security Council of the UN. But the trouble broke out again in recent weeks in another form, in strikes against the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, fomented by the same two-day party which pushed the Azerbaijan revolt last year. The strikes were suppressed after the Anglo-Persian Oil Company raised wages, by order of Mr. Bevan, by the way, but not until the British had moved troops into Basra near the Iranian frontier, to which the Russians objected. The Russians may be within their rights, but the fact remains that they are aiding separatist movements in Iran, tribal unrest in Iraq and eastern Turkey, and left-wing nationalism among the Arabs of Egypt and other countries in the Palestine area. British embarrassment in Palestine is obviously grist to their propaganda mill. The latest Soviet move in the Middle East is an even more serious cause of worry to the British and in a lesser degree to us. The Soviets have officially demanded a change in the Dardanelles regime. They want a sole partnership with the Turks in defending the Straits, which would shut out the Western powers for the first time in a century and a half. All these things add up to a challenge to British security in a region in which not only our sympathies, but our material interests are engaged. Whatever our official attitude regarding Palestine, this country is not in favor of dislodging the British from the Middle East, when the only alternative is Russia. The British, on the other hand, increasingly look to us for cooperation in controlling and developing these regions, now that Britain is both weaker and poorer than the United States. The accent here is on the word developing. The basic difficulty in the Middle East is social and economic. The Arab populations are still very backward and very poor. They are ruled by a decadent class of feudal landowners or pashas. These, in turn, are supported by an absentee industrialism that has cared very little for the people's welfare. As a result, you have a large class of badly exploited workers and a considerable number of discontented intellectuals trained in the West. The war, hard times, and nationalist agitation have aggravated conditions and sharpened every conflict, such as the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews, who are helped by foreign capital and are therefore better off. One of the most important sections in the report of the Anglo-American Committee on Palestine is the one which points out the great divergence in living standards as between Arabs and Jews. Any attempt to temper the racial antagonism in Palestine would have to include a far-reaching improvement in the Arabs' economic opportunities. That is why the recent suggestions of American cooperation in the Palestine problem included the offer of a large loan. This would be used for the development of great projects like the TVA, comprising everything from irrigation and power to education and social uplift. This does not mean that the British themselves are not willing to help. The Labour Party's policy for the empire includes a long-range investment for social betterment and the raising of living standards. But up to now, the British themselves have been on short rations and will be until they recover their export trade and make good the ravages of war. The idea of increasing world prosperity by raising living standards in backward regions was, in fact, one of the basic peace aims of the democracies. Nothing could better cement Anglo-American relations than a partnership in this noble work. Nothing could more surely advance the prospect of a better post-war world. Good night.
The National Broadcasting Company has presented Caesar Searchinger. Next week at the same time, Mr. Searchinger will be back with another story behind the headlines. This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.